I'll take Texas. I think they win and cover. I expect a dominant performance here from the Longhorns. Hello and welcome to Always College Football. I'm your host, Greg McElroy, and today is Thursday, October 10th, 2024. And this is the first Thursday show that we've done where it's like, wow, we have a whole bunch of games that we need to break down, and we need to dive deep into. So we appreciate you that have joined the show for the last 6 weeks. It's week 7. We're almost at the midway point, and now it's time to start separating the men from the boys. For those of you that are joining us on the Apple Podcast, the Spotify platform, wherever you get your podcast, encourage you to like, rate, and subscribe to the show. Subscribe first, then rate. If you want to leave a review, that is much appreciated. I've already explained this to you guys a couple times. We have had our reviews sabotaged a year ago. Around early December, we were at 4.9 or 5.0. Well, then a team gets left out of the playoffs, and then we all of a sudden drop to like a 3-4. Not sure how. Clearly, it's our fault that teams get left out of the playoffs. Not the committees. It's ours here at ACF. But you guys have pushed back to the rating sabotage, and we appreciate all of you that have taken the time to write a really kind review. I told you a bunch of your names the other day. Chance, Cam, Cockiest, all of these, Adrian, Gabby, Captain, J.A., Knopf, all these things, RMGTX, all of you guys that have taken the time to write reviews, we very much appreciate it. I know I'm forgetting a lot of you, so I apologize in advance. Look, we need to dive in. We have a bunch of games this weekend to look forward to. This is a big-time weekend to make statements. Some teams have yet to be tested. Some teams are stepping onto the big platform for the very first time. And then some teams are in a little bit of desperation mode. So we will dive in and we'll do it the way we always do it, going in chronological order, starting with noon Eastern time on Saturday, where Alabama will play host to South Carolina. Alabama is a 21-point favorite. The total is 50.5. Alabama currently leads the all-time series 13-3, including 8-1 in Tuscaloosa. This is the first meeting between the two teams since 2019 and the first meeting in Tuscaloosa since 2009. I was the quarterback in that game. I didn't play very well. We won the game, but it was not because of me. That was actually Mark Ingram's coming out party when he ran for like 250. So really, really fun to see a Heisman moment there, even though it came at my expense. Let's start with question number 1. How does Alabama respond to the adversity from last week? Alabama has not had consecutive games that they lost in the regular season since 2007. Okay, that is 205 games between losing streaks. That's the second longest span in the AP poll era. The only one better was Oklahoma from 1999 through 2020, which is pretty wild, by the way. 256 games consecutively without losing 2 in a row. Now, Alabama has been really good in the regular season following a loss since 2008. They are 11-0. It's amazing that there's only 11 regular season losses since 2008 is one big takeaway. The other one is that they're winning these games convincingly by an average of about 23 points per game. So it's the best record and the best points per game differential in the regular season following a loss during that span amongst anybody. But the question is, was last week more about Vanderbilt or was it about Alabama's ineptitudes? And I don't know if I know the answer to that. I know that Vanderbilt was great last week, but was that because Alabama has struggles on defense? We'll find out. I do think Alabama's got a lot of room to grow on that side of the ball, and they are now being tested in the court of public opinion for the very first time. It's easy to fall victim after the rat poison. Everyone tells you how great you are, but now everyone tells you how much you stink. How do you respond? We'll find out the state of the program this weekend. Number 2, can South Carolina sustain drives like Vandy did? Can they pound the football? Can they dominate time of possession? One reason why Vanderbilt pulled off the upset last week is because Alabama had under 18 minutes time of possession. That's their lowest in any game in the last 25 years. So it's insane to think just how long Vandy possessed the ball. They also continued to keep their offense on the field by stringing together third down conversions and one fourth down conversion. So in gotta have it scenarios on third and fourth down, they were 13 of 19. That's the most third down conversions allowed by Alabama in the last 25 years. I think South Carolina's going to try to replicate that plan. But the problem is they haven't been very good on third down this year. Just 30% of third downs converted for the Gamecocks offense. That's the second worst in the SEC. Let's go to question 3. Can South Carolina's defensive line impact the game? We have seen Alabama's offensive line earlier in the year against South Florida kind of struggle. But that was before they figured out the right recipe, which 5 guys to have on the field. They now have everyone back at full strength, and while the right tackle has had some ups and downs, the offensive line has not really been a huge problem this season, at least the last few weeks. But here's probably the most disruptive defensive ends they've faced this year in obvious passing situations. Dylan Stewart, the true freshman who's a superstar, and Kyle Kennard, the transfer from Georgia Tech, those guys have been amazing on the ends of the lines of scrimmage. Can Alabama contain them? And frankly, can they avoid the obvious third and long situation where those guys are breathing fire off the edge? The way you do that is by pounding the football. I would expect a heavy dose of Alabama's run game running straight at those defensive ends with not just Jalen Milroe, but also with the running backs. And then question 4, can Alabama limit the run game? South Carolina is a run-heavy team. They average 46 carries this year per game. That's the second most in the SEC, but they're not super efficient running the football. Just 4 yards per carry. That's 12th in the SEC. Just 2.2 yards after first contact. That's last in the SEC. And 28% of their rush attempts have gone for 0 or negative yards. That's 15th out of 16th in the SEC. Lenora Sellers, he runs it a lot. 14 carries a game. That's the 6th most in the FBS and the 2nd most in the SEC behind Diego Pavia from Vanderbilt, who of course had his way with the Tide defense last week. Couple trends in the game. Alabama's 5-1 against the spread in the last 6 home games, and South Carolina's 4-1 against the spread against AP top 10 teams under Shane Beamer. I'll take the Tide in a bounce back performance, mainly on defense. I would expect Alabama to stop the run. I think they'll do a good job in coverage against what I think is an underwhelming wide receiver core, and they get back on track with a nice offensive performance. I think it might look a little bit like Ole Miss's performance last week when they beat South Carolina convincingly, mainly because of how well their defense played. Moving on to Saturday at 3:30 Eastern Time on ABC. Number 1 Texas takes on the 18th ranked Oklahoma Sooners, where Texas is currently about a 2-touchdown favorite. Texas enters the Red River Rivalry ranked number 1 for the first time since 1984. So it's been a while, and this is a great, great scene. If you have not been to this game, you love college football, remove your fandom for a moment. If you love college football, make this game a priority. I've been to 9 of them. It's my favorite game in the sport as far as the setting, the scene, the 50-yard line split, crimson and cream on one side, burnt orange and white on the other. It's just the best. So highly recommend this game because it's been played there at Fair Park since 1929, played inside the Cotton Bowl since 1937. When you walk in, you feel like you're walking back in time. Look, over the last 70 meetings, Oklahoma leads the series 34, 33, and 3. But Texas leads the overall, but the last 70 have been won by Oklahoma. Now, close games are also a huge part of this rivalry dating back to the beginning of the college football playoff era. That was 2014. They've played 11 times. 9 of the 11 have been decided by 8 points or fewer. Now, Texas is the number 1 team in the country, according to the AP. Oklahoma has fared quite well against the number 1 overall team. They're 7-16-2 all-time against AP number 1 teams. Those 7 wins is tied for the 4th most of any program. Only Alabama, Miami, and Notre Dame have more wins against AP number 1s. What's the recipe for Oklahoma? And this is going to sound like we're in an upside-down world, right? Oklahoma needs this game to be ugly. They need to muddy it up. They need to slow it down. So that's question number 1. Can they do it? Can Oklahoma make this an ugly game? It's a weird world where we're thinking about the high-flying Sooners, at least for the last decade. They're going to need to make sure it's nasty, physical, slow, disrupt the tempo, lean on the run game, force turnovers. That's kind of strange to me to think how quickly Oklahoma's identity's changed under Brent Venables. So I think their best path to victory is by making things really uncomfortable for Texas. That's in special teams, that's by turning it over, and that's by shrinking the amount of possessions that Texas has. Let's be real. Texas has a superior roster. They have more depth. The more reps that are played in this game, the more that is an advantage in favor of the Longhorns. Oklahoma, I think you got to slow things down for your freshman quarterback and make sure it's a conservative plan going into it. Question 2, can Oklahoma limit the big plays? Because Texas has made a living this season, and really since Sark got there. They've been so good at manufacturing big plays downfield. They have 36 plays of 20 or more yards this year. That's top 8 in the country. They have 6 plays that have gone for 50 plus. That's also top 8 in the country. 10% of their plays go for 20 plus yards. That's 8th as well. So this is a very explosive offense led by Quinn Ewers, who has missed a little time, but he's expected to be back. He has that oblique injury, cost him the last couple starts. But he is, I'm sure, as a kid from Dallas-Fort Worth, very anxious to get back and play well in this game. He's completed 73% of his passes this year, 8-2 touchdown to interception. And last year against Oklahoma, got off to a bit of a slow start, but finished with a flurry. 31 of 37 for 346. More on that performance from last year here in just a minute. They've identified a number 1 wide receiver in Isaiah Bond. Matthew Golden's become a really solid number 2. Ryan Wingo, that's a freshman that's developing into a big play threat on the outside. You have a capable receiving tight end in Gunnar Helm. Like, there's a lot to like about the weaponry that Texas has. So can Oklahoma limit some big plays? Because against Tennessee, Oklahoma's defense played pretty dang well, didn't they? And they played well. They did a lot of good things in that game, but they did give up just a couple big plays, and that was ultimately what won the game for the Volunteers. That and the fact that Oklahoma could manufacture absolutely nothing offensively. Question number 3, can Oklahoma get the run game going? Now, you know they're going to want to slow down the tempo. You know they're going to try to utilize the run. I don't love their offensive line. I don't love the matchup between them and the Texas defensive front. But I do think their quarterback, Michael Hawkins' mobility can make life very difficult for you. Look, he's a dual threat player, had 14 for 69 and a touchdown against Auburn, including one where he split the safeties. So you can kind of see there's some big play potential when the ball's in his hands. So Texas, you got to be really smart when rushing the passer, when the passer runs like Michael Hawkins. And this guy can take off and take it the distance in a hurry. He's probably the most difficult guy to defend from a quarterback run standpoint at Oklahoma since Kyler Murray. So this guy, and look, Caleb Williams was super athletic. Spencer Rattler had a lot of athleticism as well. But you look at Kyler back in 2019, I mean, that's what Michael Hawkins kind of reminds me of. Like, this guy can just take off and he's out the gate. So you got to be super disciplined with your pass rush. But I look at last year, and Oklahoma, Dylan Gabriel's not traditionally a great runner. Well, he ran for over 100 yards in this game against Texas last year en route to what was a pretty significant upset. So quarterback's legs might be a huge factor in this one. Can Texas slow it down, and can Oklahoma utilize them? And then question number 4, will Oklahoma force some turnovers? I'm going to be honest. If both teams keep a clean sheet in this one, meaning 0 turnovers on one side, 0 turnovers on the other, I lean Texas big. But if Oklahoma can manufacture some turnovers, that's when I think the scales start to neutralize just a little bit. Now, Oklahoma's forced 13 turnovers this year. That's 4th in the FBS. They are +8 turnover margin. That's 3rd in the FBS. They have 49 points off turnovers. That's top 5. Man, do they rip at the football too. I mean, you watch them almost every play. I mean, there's guys coming from all over the place trying to strip it, trying to punch it out. Like, they really emphasize it, and it shows up when you watch them. They've recovered 6 fumbles on defense alone. That's the most in the country. They also had 2 more fumble recoveries on special teams. So this is a team that really prides itself in creating the short field for their offense, and I think they're going to need it in this one. Look, Quinn was great last year for the final 3 quarters, but early in the game, a couple picks, a couple things I'm sure he would love to have had back, really is what kind of put them behind the 8 ball, at least in the early going. So can Oklahoma force some turnovers? Question number 4. A couple trends in the game. Texas, this would be the 3rd time as a double-digit favorite over Oklahoma since 1978. They were a 3-touchdown favorite in 96 and a 2-touchdown favorite in 05. We all know about that 2005 team. That team went on to win the national championship, led by Vince Young. Oklahoma, they're a 14-point dog right now for the first time since the 2018 college football playoff semifinal. That's when they were a 15-point dog against Alabama. Alabama won that game convincingly there at the Orange Bowl. And then finally, with the total being where it's at, around 49.5, maybe 50.5, kind of right around there. It's kind of fluctuating all over the place. This will be the lowest total in the matchup since 2014. But the over is hit in 3 of the last 4 meetings. I'll take Texas. I think they win and cover. I expect a dominant performance here from the Longhorns. I just think right now when we look at Oklahoma, just don't trust them offensively. I don't trust their offensive line, and I think their defense will hold up as long as humanly possible, but I don't think they can hold up for 60 minutes. It's going to be close for a couple quarters where Texas eventually pulls away and wins the game comfortably. I'm thinking around 35-17 in that vicinity. Saturday, 3:30 Eastern time on CBS, Penn State travels all the way cross country and will play against the USC Trojans. Penn State has allowed just 17 second half points this season, and they have not allowed a point in the 3rd quarter. So Penn State's been really good after halftime. They're a narrow favorite, about 5.5 in that vicinity, and the total hovers around 48. Here's question number 1. Which team will start fast? By the way, did anyone else find it somewhat comical this week when James Franklin was discussing the State College runway and how challenging it is and how it's a 5.5-hour flight from State College to LA, and they would have to refuel, and the jet's too big and the jet's too heavy because of the fuel, and we need to pay all this money into expanding the runway? It's like, James, how many more dollars does Penn State need to spend? Didn't they just approve like $1 billion to a stadium renovation? Don't they have like crazy NIL support? Like, where is this money coming from? I love it. I'm all for it. But man, I can tell you this as a college coach, if I were one, I'm not trying to generate revenue to expand the runway that I have in my hometown. Like, we'll just drive to Harrisburg. It's fine. Every time I've called a game at Penn State, I've done it by flying into Harrisburg, and it's never been a problem. So I digress. Found that a little bit funny considering how much attention that's gotten this week. Let's go to some of the keys to the game. Number 1, which team will start fast? Penn State will start there. Opening quarter against UCLA. Okay. UCLA, we all know UCLA is pretty average, right? Not a great team. They're at home too, by the way. So it's not like they're sluggish, they're jet lagged. They're at home. UCLA comes to town. And right out of the gate, Penn State goes 10 plays, 28 yards. They had the ball for less than 5 minutes in the first quarter. They were 0 for 2 on 3rd down conversions in the first quarter. After they won the toss, they took the ball and they went 3 and out. Okay, that's just not going to be good enough moving forward, because I like Penn State and where they've grown offensively. I do, but I still think they're a team that's going to be super comfortable playing with the lead. Why? Because of how they rush the passer and because of how they run the football. So I think they need to get off to a good start here and kind of kill the will of USC, because USC's season is kind of hanging in the balance right now. It's not, at least it feels like it is. Look, they need a fast start to get the crowd into it. This is USC. USC needs a fast start to get the crowd into it, to kind of infuse some energy. They had a tough day offensively last week. I would be surprised if you got consecutive weeks that were substandard offensively. I think Miller Moss will bounce back. I think Lincoln Riley will have a great plan. I think this is by far the best offense that Penn State's faced this year. So I think a fast start for both teams really, really important. For Penn State, because they haven't really started fast this year. And then for USC to kind of get the mojo flowing in the right direction. Let's go to question 2. How confident should we be in Penn State's offense? They actually, statistically speaking, they come in looking pretty good. 22nd right now in total offense. They appear, when I've watched them, to be significantly better in several categories, including being able to manufacture some explosive plays. We've long known that they have really good running backs. This is not the first season that they've had an excellent tight end. They've been good at tight end for as long as I can remember. This is not the first season where they haven't had good quarterback. Like, I think that Drew Aller and the quarterback situation appears to be improved, significantly improved. So basically everything that we've seen in the first month of the season is like, check the box, check the box. Yep, they've done that. Yep, this. Yep, we've done it all. Everything feels good under Andy Kotelnicki right now. But here's the question. They looked really good against West Virginia and 2 MAC teams. Every team that they looked dominant against was in the bottom half when it comes to S&P Plus defensive rankings. In the last 2 weeks, Penn State has looked a little bit more human on the offensive side of the football. They've averaged just 348 yards a game in Big Ten play. And I'm not looking at Illinois or UCLA right now, and I think Illinois is a good team, by the way. I don't think UCLA is very good, but I digress. It's not like those two teams are up to the level of an Ohio State or an Oregon or even a Michigan on defense. So looking at all of that, are they a lot better? I mean, 340 plus yards is not where you want to be. And look, Penn State, they're aiming to take down Ohio State. Like, they're not aiming to finish 3rd or 4th again. Like, they're aiming for the top. And they have the team, it feels like, to do it on the defensive side, but is the offense ready to take that step? Now, Drew Aller, like I said, been super steady this year. Very steady. 71% of his passes have been completed. That's way higher than it was the year before. And I've been pretty impressed with his willingness to use his legs. That's been significant. They've always had a great running back tandem. Singleton and Allen, awesome. They've combined for nearly 800 yards and 8 touchdowns. I hated that Singleton was a late scratch for the UCLA game. And I know he's questionable going into this weekend, but if he can't go, Allen is more than capable of handling that load. And then the offensive line, been pretty encouraged. I think they've held up pretty well. Haven't given up a bunch of sacks. They've been able to do some nice things in the run game. I think the receivers, including the tight end Tyler Warren, is amazing. I think the receivers on the outside and Wallace and Evans, feel pretty good about those guys, taking some of the pressure off the go-to guy and the tight end, Tyler Warren. So I feel pretty good about what I've seen from their offense, but I do think that this will be a scenario in which they're tested a little more than they have been, and you might need to score more than 24 to win. We'll find out. Question 3, can USC's offensive line hold up? Now, looking back at last week and really at SC's offense through the start of the season, going into last week, Miller Moss had been hit more than any quarterback in the country. And then last week, he got hit a bunch again last week. Then you look at the pressure numbers. Michigan had 21 pressures, including 6 quarterback hits and 4 sacks. Minnesota recorded a bunch of pressures as well, including a big whiff by the right tackle that led to an interception that ultimately changed the game. Now, USC's offensive line is going to have their hands full in this game, guys, because the 2 best players on the defense, or maybe even on the whole team for Penn State, live on the edges of the defense. It's Abdul Carter on one side, it's Danny Dennis Sutton on the other. So if those 2 tackles aren't playing very well, look out, because those 2 guys can take over the game and make life extremely difficult on the USC passing attack. And then question number 4, I guess, pivoting off of James Franklin's complaints about having to travel cross country. Believe me, I know it's difficult, and the records prove it. 2 time zone travel this year. Will it matter? That's question 4. Teams that have traveled 2+ time zones in the Big Ten so far are just 1-8. but only one of those losses was a big upset. So we're able to look at this and say, okay, all right, well, 1-8, that's clearly a trend, right? There have been 9 examples in which teams have traveled multiple time zones. And yeah, the results aren't very good. But only one of those teams that went on the road was expected to win. That was USC last week at Minnesota. They were a heavy 8.5, 9.5 point favorite. So that's really the only big upset. The others, Michigan State lost to Oregon. They were expected to. UCLA lost convincingly to Penn State, expected to. SC lost to Michigan, expected to. Actually, take that back. They were a slight favorite in that game. What were they? 4.5 point favorite. So slight favorite, but not a monumental upset by any stretch of the imagination. Wisconsin lost to SC, expected. Michigan lost to Washington, expected, by the way. Washington was favored in that game. Washington lost to Rutgers. So I guess you could say it was moderate upset, but not really. And then Northwestern lost to Washington. So going through it all, the only win, by the way, was Indiana that dominated UCLA. This doesn't feel like the trend that's been created with the 2 time zone travel is a fair indicator, because it's not like there have been monumental upsets on a weekly basis. So it's worth monitoring, but I can't imagine it's a huge factor in the game. Couple trends here. USC has covered 3 straight as an underdog dating back to last season. Penn State is 9-0 against the spread as a road favorite since 2022. That's the most cover wins without a loss over that span. This is an interesting game to pick here because, as you guys know, I really like USC. I think they're excellent. I think they're better than their record would indicate. I do think there's holes on the team. I think they're far from perfect, but I love Penn State. And while I don't like the travel situation for the Nittany Lions, I think defense travels. And I think the pass rush travels. And the pass rush for Penn State will prove to be a little too much. So I will take the Nittany Lions in what I think will be a low-scoring game where both defenses play really well, but it's ultimately a turnover forced by Penn State that leads to the short field and ultimately the win. Saturday, 7:30 Eastern Time, one of the biggest games of the college football season up to this point, will take place. It's number 2 Ohio State against number 3 Oregon from Eugene. Ohio State is a slight road favorite right now. The total is hovering just north of 52 and a half, 53, right around there. It's kind of bouncing all over the place. Big time showdown, a historically significant game here, not just because these 2 teams are now in the Big Ten, but because, man, top 5 teams have not come to Autzen Stadium in quite a while. It's been since 2016. So this is going to be awesome to check this one out. And the second we found out that Oregon was heading into the Big Ten, this was the matchup you dreamed of, right? Oregon has long felt like the Ohio State of the Pac-12. Some people will say SC, fair enough. But Oregon, with their NIL support, with their resources, with the amount of big guys that they can recruit along the offensive and defensive line, plus the skill that they've been able to recruit for a really long time as well, at least in the modern era, Oregon has felt like a cut above anything we've seen from the Trojans, at least the last 7-8 years. Ohio State is the standard when it comes to Big Ten football, even though they've lost the last 3 to Michigan. Over the course of time, Ohio State has been the best program in the Big Ten. Let's dive into the matchups on the field that might determine the outcome. Number 1, will Ohio State continue to dominate in the trenches? When you look at Ohio State and how the offensive line has played, let's just call it what it is. Ohio State, the last couple of years along the offensive line, hasn't been great. It's been their Achilles heel. It's been the weakest part of their team. But it appears, granted, albeit the first few weeks against less than stellar competition, it appears like that group has taken a considerable step. Now, Iowa is who they played last week. Iowa came into the game against the Buckeyes with the number 4 rush defense in the country. They were allowing just 62 yards per game, and no team had rushed for more than 100 or a touchdown against them. Well, in comes Ohio State. They go out, They have 42 rushing yards in the first quarter alone, and they cap off the day with 200 plus rushing yards. And they got in the end zone on the ground as well. Only 4 different offenses have averaged more than 5 yards per carry against the Hawkeyes since 2018. Ohio State just joined that list. Now, Oregon, they've seen good rushing attacks before, but I don't know if they've seen one quite like this. The 1-2 punch that you're going to get from Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson is an awful lot to handle. Couple that with the quarterback run game, which we'll talk about here in a minute, that Howard has kind of contributed to this offense, and it becomes very dicey. But Oregon has seen a super capable back in Ashton Jeanty. Oregon played Boise State. Now, if you look at what Ashton Jeanty did against the Ducks, he went for $192 and 3 touchdowns. But that seems to be the outlier performance for Oregon's defense, because Oregon has held 3 opponents to under 60 total yards rushing this year. And while 131 were allowed on the ground against Oregon State, only 15 came in the second half. So they made some adjustments and things seemingly started to go in the right direction. So Ohio State's offensive line and run game, is that what makes them different? Question 2, who will win in the red zone? Because this was also a huge problem for Ohio State last year. They were actually number 57 in the country last year in red zone efficiency. Well, this year, not only are they better, they are unrecognizably improved. There, as the field starts to condense, they are number 1 right now in red zone efficiency. They have scored on all 21 red zone penetrations. And remarkably, of those 21 scores, 20 were touchdowns. It's absurd. You got 12 rushing touchdowns, 8 passing touchdowns, and 1 field goal. Now, quarterback run has been really helpful in this part of the field. When the field condenses and the numbers get a little bit dicier, it's nice to know that Will Howard, who at 235 pounds is a very effective runner, a physical runner, and has 4 rushing touchdowns on the season, all of which are when the field gets super condensed. Now, Oregon, on the other hand, their offense has not been quite as clean in the red zone. Gabriel, their quarterback, Dylan Gabriel, hasn't made a lot of great decisions. Through the first 3 games, things were looking pretty good. Well, the last couple weeks, not so much. He has 3 red zone interceptions the last couple weeks. So his decision-making when things have gotten a little tighter has not been quite as good. Now, while Oregon's offense, when they haven't made mistakes, opposing defenses really haven't been able to stop them. So the only other red zone appearance without points came when they played against UCLA, and that's because the Ducks took a knee in the red zone. So Oregon's got to clean things up a little bit based on the last couple of weeks, but for the most part, they can look in the mirror and say, yeah, we've kind of stopped ourselves with some bad decisions. Question 3, can either team contain the top weapons? Because these teams, there's just weapons all over the field. It's like, there's a first rounder, there's a first rounder. Well, who do I throw to? The guy that's going to be drafted number 3 overall, or the guy that could be drafted number 1 overall in a couple years? Like, it's absurd how deep these rosters are with talent and weapons. For Oregon, a guy that just doesn't get enough love, even dating back to last year, he just is constant production. He just never, ever, ever goes into a game and disappears. Every week you expect to see Tez Johnson high on the targets, high on the receptions, high on the production, and that's been the case this year as well. Gabriel has targeted Johnson way more than just about anybody else, especially since the bye week. Gabriel's attempted 73 passes in the last couple weeks. 28 of those 73 have gone in the direction of Tez Johnson. The next closest, as far as targeted receivers, has 11. So it's 2.5, 2.7 to 1 when looking at the target share that Tez Johnson has. So it's going to be of the utmost importance for the super talented Ohio State secondary to bracket Tez Johnson and not allow him to get a lot of space. On the other side, Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Egbuka. Incredible weapons. Now, Jeremiah Smith, he's been every bit as advertised, super impactful. The guy has great length. He makes a freak show type of catch almost every single week. You watch the highlights, you're just absolutely out of your mind. has created a ton of big plays, has found the red zone, has found the end zone multiple times. The guy just every week is just more impressive than he was the week before, but people have seemingly forgot about Emeka Egbuka. Emeka Egbuka is as reliable and as talented and as good of a route runner as far as creating sudden separation as you'll find in the Big Ten. Now, while he's overshadowed because of the highlight reel that we see from Jeremiah Smith every week, do not lose sight of how impactful Emeka Egbuka can be, especially when lined up in the slot. A couple trends in the game. Oregon is 1-4 against the spread in their last 5 as an underdog. Oregon is also 0-3 against the spread at home this season. I look at this game and I think Ohio State's going to flex. I'm not sold right now on Oregon's offensive or defensive line. I think Oregon has a couple of really good pass rushers, but I don't know if those pass rushers are going to get a lot of obvious passing situations because of how effective I anticipate the Ohio State run game being. I think Ohio State has a vastly superior roster and will pound the football. I like the Buckeyes to win this game convincingly on the road and reminding everyone that they are still the king in the Big Ten, regardless of how many teams have now entered the fold. Saturday, 7:30 Eastern time on ABC. Top 13 matchup between 9th-ranked Ole Miss Rebels and the LSU Tigers. Nighttime in Baton Rouge. Ole Miss is a slight favorite right now. It's a 12th all-time meeting between Ole Miss and LSU as ranked teams, and LSU has the edge when they are both ranked. It's the 113th playing of the Magnolia Bowl. LSU leads the all-time series 65-43-4. Ole Miss has, however, though, won 2 of the last 3, but LSU has won 7 straight in Baton Rouge. So it's going to be very, very interesting. The last top 15 meeting between these two teams was when Nick Saban was patrolling the sideline for the Bayou Bengals and Eli Manning was the quarterback for the Ole Miss Rebels. It's pretty wild because LSU beat Eli and the 15th ranked Ole Miss Rebels 17-14. That handed the Rebels their only conference loss of the season, which prevented them from clinching the SEC West, but it did give them a share, their only share in SEC history. Nick Saban and that 03 team went on to win the national championship. So, going to be wild. This is going to be a big one. I look forward to being on the call alongside Sean McDonough, Molly McGrath, there from Baton Rouge. Question number 1. Is the loser out of the playoff picture? Now, a lot of us have wondered, is the regular season going to be somewhat watered down as a result of the expanded playoff? And I think this game is an indicator that it might be a tiniest bit watered down, but not so much because it feels like a second loss for LSU or Ole Miss would basically keep them out. And part of that has to do with what remains on the schedule. Ole Miss still has to go to Arkansas. They still have Georgia that comes to them. And right now, I don't know about y'all, I don't love the matchup between Ole Miss and Georgia. Not right now. LSU, on the other hand, they go to Arkansas as well. They're at A&M. They got Alabama. Those 3 games all take place in the next 30 days. So do you think they can navigate through that unscathed in the event in which they lose to LSU this weekend? Or lose to Ole Miss this weekend? I think that's a tough thing to envision. So is the loser out? I think depending on what happens around them is possibly a yes. Because I think the loser certainly loses control of their own destiny, which is not a good spot to be in when considering what's happening in other conferences. Question 2, what's better? LSU's offense or Ole Miss's defense? Now, LSU, maybe you haven't paid a ton of attention, and it would be understandable if you hadn't. But if you look at how they've played against SC and South Carolina, people have kind of drawn conclusions based on those performances. And then sandwiched between those two was a less than stellar performance against Nicholls State. But since that time, they've really started to identify a pecking order at wide receiver, but they can go 5 deep. They have now found a capable running back with explosive capability in Caden Durham to take some of the pressure off the passing game, and they've always had the super steady and reliable Mason Taylor. They are really deep across the board. We already know how good this offensive line is, bookended tackles with amazing high-level ceilings. The interior got big physical offensive linemen that can impose their will on the opposing defensive line. So I think more often than not, when looking at LSU's offense against Ole Miss's defense, it'd be a pretty significant advantage in favor of LSU. But that's not the case this year. Ole Miss's defense is allowing 7.5 points per game this year. That's the third fewest in the FBS. Only Ohio State and Texas have allowed fewer points through the first 6 games. So they've done a pretty dang good job on that side of the ball. And their defense, by the way, to take things one step further, they have 24 sacks this season. LSU's offense has allowed just 2. That's tied with Coastal Carolina for the 4th fewest in the FBS, behind Army, Georgia Tech, and New Mexico. So considering LSU has already played South Carolina and some other teams that can rush the passer, to have only 2 sacks is pretty dang impressive. But Ole Miss has been pinning their ears back and getting after opposing quarterbacks all season long. They lead the country with those 24 sacks. Question 3. Will LSU's pass rush create some problems? Look, Ole Miss's weakness is their offensive line. They're inconsistent. They have moved guys in and out of the lineup. Their left tackle's been banged up, so they've been starting another guy, but they are rotating at other places. I mean, we've seen multiple guys playing guard. We've seen multiple guys playing center. We've seen multiple guys playing right tackle. Like, they're trying to figure out who are the best 5. Who are the 5 that are the most consistent right now? And when you watch them, the one thing that's always consistent is that Jackson Dart is taking hit after hit after hit after hit. The offensive line has not been good in pass protection. And while they have been pretty good running the football, it's mostly because of the scheme that has allowed them to be successful. The offensive line is a weakness right now for the Rebels. Then you look at the other side. LSU has pressured opponents on 49% of their dropbacks this season. That's the 2nd highest rate in the FBS, behind Penn State, who pressures opposing quarterbacks at a 51% clip. So if you don't know about these guys yet, you need to learn. Braden Swinson on one side, Savion Jones on the other. They're the 2 best DNs that the national audience probably doesn't know about enough. These guys are the real deal, man. They are really, really good. And if those 2 guys can get going off the edge, that could be a long day for those Ole Miss tackles and for Jackson Dart. And then question number 4. I don't really like to do this, but I think both these teams are going to go as their quarterback goes. Jackson Dart on one side, Garrett Nussmeier on the other. Now, Jackson Dart has been really good at home. He's 14-3 at Vaught Hemingway. He's 38-5 touchdown to interception ratio, but on the road hasn't been quite as good. He's 13-10 touchdown to interception ratio when he's away from the friendly confines of Vaught Hemingway. He's also just 8-4 in his win-loss. And some of those traveling games, one's at Wake Forest, one's at Tulane. So you got to take some of those with a grain of salt as well, that when they've gone on the road, it hasn't always been against top shelf competition. But Jackson Dart is still very athletic, has an excellent supporting cast, assuming his supporting cast is at 100%, which is a big assumption right now because Trey Harris, his number 1 wide receiver and arguably the most productive receiver in the sport, he's got an ankle injury. We're not sure just yet if he's going to be able to go. So can Jackson Dart put the team on his back, elevate the play around him, and lead his team to victory? Or will it be Garrett Nussmeier? Now, Gus Nussmeier has thrown for 300 yards in 4 of the first 5 games this year. That's something that was done by only 2 LSU players, Jaden Daniels and Joe Burrow. Both those guys have a Heisman Trophy sitting on their mantle. When you watch Nussmeier, he anticipates throws, super accurate, has an incredibly good supporting cast. He's tough as nails. He's scrappy in the run game, not a guy that's going to take off, but can keep you honest occasionally with his legs. So I think quarterback play in this one, whichever quarterback plays better, that's ultimately going to lead to who wins the game. A couple trends in the game. LSU is 1-4 against the spread in their last 5 against AP-ranked opponents. Ole Miss is 8-2-1 against the spread as a road favorite under Lane Kiffin. And 6 of the last 7 meetings between these 2 teams have gone over the total. I will not be making a pick, but we hope that you tune in 7:30 Eastern time on ABC when we call the game there from Baton Rouge. Few other games of interest here. The 16th ranked Utah Utes head to Arizona State. This is Friday night, 10:30 Eastern time. Rest up. It's going to be a late night on Friday and a late night on Saturday. Utah's won the last 4 meetings, including 55-3 last year in Salt Lake. They are, however, just 5-15 on the road against Arizona State all time. Look, I don't know what to make of Utah. I mean, coming out of the bye week, shocking loss to Arizona. Isaac Wilson, he's been fine. You can't make him drop back and throw it 100 times like you did against Arizona. So I don't know. If Cam Rising's available, if he can go, I feel a lot better about Utah in this game. But I don't trust the injury reports. And even if he's warming up in the pregame, until I see him on the field, I don't know what to believe. On the other side, I do think the Sun Devils have a pretty stout defensive line that can kind of slow things down a little bit for the opposing offense. So if they can stop the run and force Isaac Wilson to throw, that could be a big benefit to what Arizona State has going on. Cam Scatabo, by the way, the running back, do-it-all player for Arizona State. He's got 619 yards in 5 games, but this will be by far the toughest game to date. I just don't trust Utah's offense at all. But I don't know if there's going to be a lot of points scored here either. I'll take Utah, but I expect it to be close. I'll probably take the points there in the desert. Cal at Pitt. Pitt, a narrow favorite right now. A win over Cal would give Pitt their first 6-0 start since 1982. And you got to wonder, which Cal are we going to get? The one that blew the 25-point lead in the second half, or the one that started like gangbusters against Miami and were super opportunistic? You got to hope there's not a hangover for Cal here, because it's a long way to travel when taking into account you had your heart ripped out just a couple days ago. Now, Pitt, they've won 3 Power 4 games by a combined 15 points. So it's been really narrow margins. It's been pretty miraculous at the end of the game to see them kind of go into the overdrive and erase some double-digit deficits. Eli Holstein is thrown into traffic a lot, but there's not a lot of picks. He's been a little careless and needs to be a lot smarter against a Cal defense that is a little bit boom or bust, but they can turn you over. Part of me wants to take Cal in this game, so I will. I think Cal bounces back, forces a couple of interceptions, and as a result pulls off a bit of a stunner against the Pitt Panthers and disrupting their undefeated season. Let's go next. Saturday, 4 o'clock Eastern time, Arizona at number 14 BYU. With a win, BYU would have its 6th-0 start in school history, and their second under Kalani Sitake. That was back in 2020. Look, the defensive coaching staff for BYU has done an amazing job, all right? They basically look at your offense. They say, all right, what do you do well? And we are going to 100% shut down that one thing. So it's pretty obvious what it's going to be when you play against Arizona. They're going to say, all right, we will not allow Tetairoa McMillan to take over the game. Tetairoa McMillan, they're going to find a recipe to take him away, and they're going to find a way to make sure that Noah Fafita isn't running around and creating and buying time and doing the miraculous there behind the line of scrimmage. Now, Arizona's defense is pretty improved. They've done a pretty good job. But I don't know. I mean, this is a BYU offense with Jake Retzlaff and a running back by committee approach that have been pretty good. They've scored 30-plus points in 4 of their 5 games. Look at everything where it's at. BYU is 5-0 against the spread this year. One of 4 teams to cover every game alongside Army, Marshall, and Eastern Michigan. I'll take BYU. I think they're the more complete team right now, and I think their defense will contain what Arizona has offensively. Saturday, 7 Eastern time on ESPN, Florida heads to Knoxville to take on the 8th-ranked Volunteers. Tennessee is 15-1 at home since the start of the 2022 season. Florida's offense against Tennessee's defense. Florida's passing attack's been pretty solid. All right, offensive line's been pretty good, giving up just 5 sacks. I think that's been solid. But you look at the passing attack, yeah, they're not great as far as yards per game. They're efficient, but not elite. The big thing, though, is can they keep their quarterback upright against a Tennessee defense that can bring the heat and that can disrupt the rhythm of the passing game? On the other side, Tennessee's offense against Florida's defense. The Gators' run defense has not been very good. They're allowing 172 yards a game on the ground. That's got to feel pretty good if you're Tennessee and you understand that your passing attack is still very much a work in progress, but the one thing you can do is run the ball with a lot of efficiency. Like Nico Iamaleava last week made some mistakes, and you would expect those mistakes as a redshirt freshman. Still crazy talented, and he's going to get better as the season goes along, but they got to be able to run the football, and I think they can against a Florida defense that has been pretty inconsistent. The question is, will Florida watch that Arkansas tape and adjust their scheme and structure to kind of eliminate some of the looks that Tennessee had eliminated against them last week? A couple trends in the game. Florida's covered 5 of the last 6 meetings between these two teams. Tennessee, this would be the largest favorite role over Florida in the last 45 years, and Tennessee is 11-4 against the spread in their last 15 games as a double-digit favorite. I'll take Tennessee in a big bounce-back performance here. I'm just not 100% sure that Florida can stop the run. Until I see Florida stop the run, it's hard for me to feel good about them when matching up against a team that will run it right down your throat. And then Saturday night, 10:15 Eastern time, Kansas State takes on Colorado. This game will be on ESPN. Colorado ranks 9th in the country in second half points allowed per game. Pretty dang good. They've done a good job there in the second half. But this is the week where we find out about Colorado. The schedule has been very favorable up to this point. We've now found out that UCF is just not good. We also know that Dave Aranda and the Baylor Bears are pretty dang average as well. And it required a Hail Mary and a forced fumble at the goal line by Travis Hunter for them to win that game. Now, Colorado, their offensive line questions still exist. And I look at their one defense that they played this year that I really, really respect, and that's Nebraska's, and they didn't fare very well. On the other side, Avery Johnson's been a little inconsistent. I think he's going to find some space as a runner. I think he'll find some space and open some things up down the field. And I would expect DJ Giddens to have plenty of room to be able to run against the defensive front of Colorado that's better, but not yet to the point where they can slow down some of the most physically imposing offenses there in the Big 12. If DJ Giddens gets going, it's going to be tough, I think, for Colorado to hold this offense in check. The good news for Colorado, Kansas State is 0-5 against the spread as a road favorite since the start of last season. And Colorado is 3-0 against the spread as a home underdog under Deion Sanders. I'll take Kansas State. The Nebraska game is still what comes to my mind because I think that Nebraska defense is by far the best one that Colorado's faced this year, and they couldn't manufacture a whole lot offensively. I think this defense will play well. I think they'll run the football, and I don't like the recipe for Colorado. Give me Kansas State. I would lay the points on the road. I'll give you some giant killers before we get out of here. Arizona State over Utah. I think that's a very real possibility of an upset, even though Utah beat them 55-3 last year. I know I just gave it to you. Colorado over Kansas State. Kansas State has not been a good road favorite. All right, I like Kansas State to win the game, but if Colorado won the game, would that be surprising to you or me or anyone that's watched the Buffaloes this year? The other ones, USC over Penn State. Be very careful if you're Penn State. This is a desperate USC team. A desperate USC team that absolutely has to have it to stay at the top of the race or in the race at all. They're in the Big Ten. And then Washington over Iowa. Will Washington be reading their press clippings this week? Probably not, because no one's talking about that win last week. They're only talking about what's wrong with Michigan. So I think Washington is going to continue to play the underdog card, and they're going to go take it to Iowa. And I think Washington's defense is no joke. Just hope there's no hangover there by putting them on the giant killer list. Hey, that'll do it for us here at Always College Football. I encourage all of you to continue to like, rate, and subscribe to the show wherever you get your show. And we appreciate all of you that have supported the show for these first 7 weeks of the season. For all of us here at ACF, for Mark, Jake, Jack, the other Jack, I'm Greg. We hope you have an amazing day. And remember, it's always college football. Hey guys, it's Greg McElroy. Thanks for watching Always College Football. Make sure you like, rate, and subscribe to ESPN's YouTube channel and wherever you listen to your podcasts.